On the podcast today, we are going to speak about the first 11 sutras of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. Now, we will go through every sutra of this text eventually. We don't know how many episodes that will make up, but there's 196 sutras within the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And we actually have the Chip Hartranth translation. I love this translation, but we also recommend Swami Satchidananda's translation, Edwin Bryant's, or Georg Feuerstein's translation. There's others, but those ones particularly. And every time I'm in India, I always find myself reading the Yoga Sutras. I don't know why I always return to this text, but it's a very important text to understand the science of yoga itself. And you see this kind of science even overlaid into Jainism, Buddhism, and Vedanta. And this will even enhance your understanding of Taoism as well when you understand this, because the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali goes very deep into kind of the science of consciousness, because we say the 196 sutras, but what we should say that they're really 196 observations on the nature of consciousness itself. And so it's a very important text, one of our personal favorites. And we have to mention that when we talk about yoga here, we're not talking about what people typically think yoga is in this day and age.
Yeah, one of the main reasons why I thought of doing this, particularly Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, is because of course, to study Yoga Sutra, yoga philosophy in depth, and also to make sure we promote real study of yoga, not this exercise people think of what yoga. That's not really yoga. That's just stretches, I would say, or just hatha yoga, we should call it.
Well, without the philosophy, it's just stretches, but and traditionally it's hatha yoga, right? Yeah. And hatha yoga makes up just a small part of the general ethos of yoga, because yoga is a massive system of thought, and yoga itself comes from the Sanskrit root yug, which means to yoke or to unite or to join, union, and you don't. And from Patanjali's perspective, we don't want to think of some sort of union with God, even though in the Yoga Sutras we find Ishvara Pranidhana, which is kind of a lot of people have alluded. Or have speculated, what does he mean by Ishvara here? Does he mean Vishnu or Shiva? And a lot of people just take either or, right? But the whole idea is the kind of the union with the ultimate reality itself, and the union with nature as it is. And in this sense, we have to explain two core concepts before we read the Yoga Sutras, which is Purusha and Prakriti. And Prakriti represents all of the phenomenal world. So all of the energy, all of the mental sphere, the physical world, the material world. So everything that you experience is Prakriti. And then we have Purusha, which is pure awareness. And that's not awareness as, not just you perceiving, it's pure awareness without anything coloring the consciousness. And so in yoga being a dualistic philosophy, even though I would say it's really non-dual when we get to the kind of the climax of yoga, but there is a separation between Purusha and Prakriti. Yeah. And so that's some of the housekeeping we have to do so people understand this text.
Yes.
And as Guy Young said, yoga is often thought of just as what yoga is in the yoga studios and this and that, but that's not what yoga is. Yoga is based on Hatha Yoga and based on the Yoga Sutras. And even though yoga is also explained in other texts, right? So
yes. Again, Hatha Yoga came out much later than this Yoga Sutra text.
Well, if we look in the Gita, the three yogas are Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, right? There's not any Hatha Yoga. They're the three oldest yogas.
Yes, and then even after that, right?
Yeah.
That's how this old Raja Yoga. And,
of course.
Yeah, Bhakti and
Tantra, Mantra. The thing is that Patanjali existed, most people believe, in the 2nd century BCE. So he was a bit after like the Upanishadic era, even the Mahavira and the Buddha. He came a little bit later. And that's why a lot of people believe that yoga is kind of almost like the refinement of all of those traditions. And that's why it has the Yoga Sutras have such a big impact. That's only speculation, but you can see how that would work when someone comes a bit later. They have all of this information.
Then it is also to show how important this text is, right?
Of course, yeah.
How most fundamental philosophy to understand the yoga philosophy. And we can try to study all the other yoga, like jnani, bhakti, karma, tantra, mantra, all these things.
Yeah.
But we need to remember that all those different types of yoga came from this text.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
So this text has a lot of weight.
Of course, yeah. So let's get into it. The first, well, I'll read the first 4, and then we'll dissect those, and then we'll because we're going to do 11 today. So we'll read the first 4 because the first 4 kind of build the basis of yoga philosophy itself and how we should understand the mind and nature itself. So it says, now the teachings of yoga. Yoga is to still the patterning of consciousness. Then pure awareness can abide in its very nature. Otherwise, awareness takes itself to be the patterns of consciousness. So the first line, now the teachings of yoga. Yeah. So that one's, some people would say it's pretty self-explanatory, but like there's 2 ways to look at it, right? Like, so now the commencement of yoga begins. So Patanjali is saying, so all right, now
an announcement.
It's an announcement, right? Public service announcement. Now we're going to begin. But then there's also the esoteric element, which a lot of people like, which is that Patanjali is saying that only in the present moment yoga can exist. And that kind of perspective makes sense, especially as we get into maybe the 11th sutra, which we will explain here, which has got more to do with smriti and remembrance. But he's talking from the esoteric element that only in the present moment do we experience the unification with ourselves, with Purusha, like or to use other terminology, use Brahman or Tao or what have you. So, and then the second sutra is where kind of the whole philosophy of yoga is explained, right? So yoga is to still the patterning of consciousness. And so in Sanskrit, this is yoga's chitta vritti nirodha.
Yes.
So chitta, consciousness or mind, vritti, the whirlpools of the mind, and nirodha, the stilling, the
whirlpool of mind.
The stilling the whirlpool of the mind,
Yes.
yeah. So basically what it's saying is, well, Chip does explain it properly, like yoga is to still the patterning of consciousness, but we could say it is to still the whirlpools of the mind.
Yeah, so in the verse, the patterning of consciousness, this patterning of consciousness, that is like a movement of our mind. That's what it's talking about,
yes.
Right? Like that unconsciously it creates its own patterns in our mind. So it worded as a patterning of consciousness.
Yeah, because they are patterns in the sense that, they're recycled. We recycle memories and thoughts, and we ruminate, and we are constantly caught in this.
Yeah, we go around the circles almost. Circle of thoughts, thought after thought.
Exactly. And so we're going to explain this in detail, these 4, but like to just get through these. The third one says, then a pure awareness can abide in its pure nature. So what this means is yoga itself is this once we still the patterning of the mind, then we abide as our pure nature, which is Purusha, pure awareness here, pure Purusha. And then the 4th one, otherwise awareness takes itself to be the patterns of consciousness itself. This is where the pure awareness is entangled with the vrittis.
It's a little bit like a snake in the grass. Oh no, not sorry, rope and the snake, analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is.
Yeah. And so your pure awareness is pure, but once it becomes hijacked by the energy of Prakriti, Then you believe I'm Guyang, this person, I have dislikes and dislikes, and you see reality through the lens of a jiva, of a persona.
Yes.
And that was all because of the energy of the vrittis. The vrittis were strong. The whirlpool is strong. And then your pure awareness got, and it's an innocent thing because none of us are really spiritually trained, right? Like from birth. So we just, we come into this reality and we're not taught anything about the mind. So then when the mind wanders, we wander with it. Our pure awareness wanders with it. And then we wonder why we were daydreaming for half an hour about something that, doesn't exist, or, we were fantasizing about some sort of situation. We're a hostage to the whirlpools, to the vrittis.
It's completely sleeping, isn't it? We are completely asleep when we do that.
Yes.
Yeah, we follow where thought moves.
Yeah.
And next minute you were forgetting like where you're walking, for example.
Yes.
If you're walking. And
Yes.
we have so many experience with this.
Of course, yeah. And majority of people in the world are, from Patanjali's perspective, are sleeping because they are possessed by the vrittis. They are wandering with the mind without having any recollection of what the actual Purusha is. So their Purusha is fully entangled with the material world, the mental world, all of the energy of the whole world.
Yes.
And then so they see reality according to their perspective. And then what we have in the world then is conflict, is opinions, is disagreement.
Yes.
It all comes from this.
And again, a lot of suffering comes from this too, right? That we misunderstand the Prakriti is the pure awareness, so that we just follow our thoughts after thoughts. So that creates a lot of suffering. That creates false identification and false idea of your position in the society or whatnot, and that creates a lot of pain.
Yeah. Of course. Well, that's what suffering all arises from. It arises from the misidentification.
Yeah.
So you've bought into Prakriti, but you're Purusha. And you're always Purusha, forever. Purusha. But your mind is entangled with this state.
And what I find really interesting is that, like, this movement of mind, so patterning of consciousness itself, cannot be aware of itself. It can only be aware from the pure awareness state of mind, which is Purusha, right? So that pure awareness is always awake and always before everything. It always, and before everything and beyond everything. So it's always there to observe if you choose to, right?
Exactly.
So that once you choose to observe your this Prakriti, then you become aware of what was really going on in your mind.
And the second line is the second sutra. Is it explains everything, right? Yoga is experienced through Chittavritti Nirodha, like you were saying, with the settling of the mind, and water is a perfect analogy, right? So like water is completely, water's nature is transparent and reflective, and you can see right into it. It's clear, it's undisturbed, it reflects everything perfectly around it. And so it can see everything as it is. And, when we put energy into that, and then there's movement, then the reflection is distorted, we can't see into it properly. And these are the vrittis, right? This is the mind, the energy of the mind, kind of sucking your pure awareness into this illusion of thoughts, sense of self, so forth and so on, right? Like, so the game in yoga, basically, and the game in all spiritual practice, and this is why I mentioned that yoga philosophy is almost part and parcel of many Eastern traditions, is that there's a game of your pure awareness is unstained, it's always ever present, but the external world, or the material world, and Prakriti here, is trying to, the gravitational pull, the energy of it is is addictive.
Yes.
And so we, look at that, and then you're sucked in, and once you're sucked in, then you're like, and people do all sorts of things from that place, right?
Yes.
Like they might act in a way that they would never typically act, and then after that experience, they're like, why did I do that? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's because they lost their center. They were not abiding as the pure awareness. They were, the gravitational pull of Prakriti was too appealing.
That's right. Like you said, the water is always transparent, clear, calm when it's just still, right? And everything can be reflected on the water, and you can see the bottom of the water right through. But once you give a bit of a movement, or you hit the water, surface of the water, then we get to have this distorted vision, but that's reflected on the water.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening, that we see that distorted vision that's reflected on in that movement of water is as if real. And once the whirlpool of water happens, as you mentioned, that energy is very strong, so that you cannot, it's almost impossible not to follow the thoughts, because the thoughts are too strong and too much of a temptation, and it takes too much of attention away from you. But then after a while, when we realize that we were thinking very intensively about something very strongly, but it's very tiresome, right? It's so exhausting to keep thinking about something that's not even here, right? Usually about the past or future, right? And we try to bring that back up for some reason, and we ruminate in their thoughts, and we're going around the circles, and we're starting that patterning again.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Then after a while, we find ourselves that it's pretty tiring process, as much as how much of energy goes into to create the whirlpool in water.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how, understanding that knowledge, then people say, why is my life the way it is? Why is the world the way it is? Because of the vrittis. This is why it is. Because of this second line, chitta vritti nirodha. And you don't understand that. That's why the way it is.
Yeah.
You've become possessed with the energy and the movement of your mind, instead of understanding that it's just a movement. Like we don't find people who are cloud chasers, right? Like they're looking up at clouds and they're like, chase that cloud, without seeing the pure sky behind it. Clouds come and go. This is how our mind is. Thoughts come and go, right? Feelings come and go. Past sensations and experiences are recollected every now and again. Not all the time. But then when they come, our mind, goes here and there, and it goes on this roller coaster of experience. When the pure awareness is just chilling, like it.
Yeah, like you said about cloud. Cloud is there, come and go, it moves.
Yeah.
But sky is always there.
Always said transparent.
Above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's ever present.
That's the Purusha element.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It's just always there, ever present. And we're not looking at the sky, we're looking at the clouds, and we're chasing the clouds. And that's what, in some sense, causes all the dramas in the world. We're chasing our mind and our perspective of the world according to whatever we believe in our conditioning, right? Which is all vrittis.
Yes.
It's not pure awareness. If we all understood this science, and we daily tried to abide more in the pure awareness, then that would not happen. That would not happen. That process would not happen in life, right? Because it says there in the third sutra, a pure awareness can abide in its very nature once we do still the mind, right? And so, if we go through this process of chitta vritti nirodha, then everything's good, man. Like
when you give more energy or constant energy into that whirlpool of water, then it'll keep creating that world, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Or once we become aware of that is actually what's happening in your mind, then you just release that energy and just stop instantly.
Yeah.
Then what happens in water? It loses its power,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And just disappears on its own. And that again, that is that nirodha
Yeah, of course.
process.
You've got to stop fueling it. It's like the ceiling fan analogy, right? Like a ceiling fan is going. Once you turn the power off to the ceiling fan, there's still a bit of juice. But then it'll eventually slow down and eventually cease. And that's how the nature of our mind is. The more you practice, especially what we're talking about in the sciences of yoga here, is that the more you come from pure awareness, or to use Vedanta terminology, Atman, the more you abide in this state, the less energy you're putting into the vrittis.
Yes.
And the less you're going to be possessed by the energy of the mind.
Yes.
A lot of people will say, how come you're not, I had that experience, remember before, a long time ago, like when your flights were cancelled and I had to lecture somewhere, and my friend's like, why aren't you angry about this? And it's like, I just don't have, I don't know. I'm not bothered by it. Like, it's just happened, and you just have to move on and deal with the situation accordingly. Of course, it's a bummer that you didn't arrive on time and we had to spend extra money and then blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But it's because the vrittis are not possessing me as they once used to possess me. And so that's what happens if we all practice more of abiding as the self, the Atman, or the Purusha, so to speak. You'll stop then putting the energy into it, you know what I mean? Putting the prana or the chi into the nature of the mind. As soon as the awareness moves in that direction, that's the energy being put into it. But when you see it, and it's like a cloud and it just moves, you're like, whatever. Like, I've seen this thought before. It's not new. It's the same pattern repeating itself.
Yeah, it's interesting that how this prakriti has such energy. Well, that's why nature is out here, and this flesh is out here, and that's amazing power about it. But again, that's when we get to when things get a bit tricky, when things become too much of a temptation, which take too much attention away from our pure awareness, then we get lost and we become asleep.
Yeah.
But again, to abide in the pure awareness state of mind is to be fully awake.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So everyone can be walking in the park and just go for a walk or something, but they seem all doing the same thing. But I think the experience of each individual can be completely different.
Of course, yeah.
Someone who are just constantly listening to the heavy metal music that's going on in the earphones, or just being on the phone and very busy messaging someone or talking to someone, or you can just be purely observing what's going on around you and sensations within your body and the mind.
Yes.
Right. That's that awakening state of consciousness.
Well, there's the idea of there's one universe, but many worlds.
Yes.
Inside, and the many worlds live within us. Like you're saying, you could have two people sitting side by side, and all they're doing is sitting there, they're looking at you. But according to what has happened in their day or, whatever, there's two different states of being happening, even though what's happening here is the same for both. But they're not experiencing it the same because one's vrittis may be intensified, the others may be a bit decreased, one may be chill, and then the experiences are completely different. And so that's where, we have to understand the science of yoga. Because when we understand that, then that gives us a greater ability to empathize with other people who are going through tough times, and also, guide people on the path to, understand their mind and understand that all of the conflict and all of this is based on this kind of many worlds in conflict with each other, or in conflict with themselves most of the time. We're in conflict with ourselves, right? And so that's what yoga introduces. It introduces that you're constantly battling with yourself because your awareness is just drifting off with, whatever is presenting itself on the screen of consciousness. So we'll get into the next 7 sutras now.
So from 5 to 11. Yeah. So There are 5 types of patterns, including both hurtful and benign. They are right perception, misperception, conceptualization, deep sleep, and remembering. Right perception arises from direct observation, inference, or the words of others. Misperception is false knowledge not based on what actually is. Conceptualization is based on linguistic knowledge, not contact with real things. Deep sleep is pattern grounded in the perception that nothing exists. Remembering is the retention of experiences.
Okay. So yeah, these next 7 sutras is basically Patanjali explaining the kind of the 5 types of patterning, as he explains in the 5th sutra, right? Like,
Yeah, so 5 types of vrittis.
yeah, basically 5 types of vrittis, 5 types of ways that or pathways that our awareness gets hijacked, like, and then creates patterns, and then we have the life that we have, the jiva that we have, and then our reality is built on, or we perceive reality through those patterns, that jiva, through those vrittis. And so, as you said, right perception, misperception, conceptualization, deep sleep, and remembering. And so this is kind of, in somewhat, people would think is a unique perspective, because people probably haven't thought about that. Like, a pattern's like, right perception is a pattern of thing, and yes, it is a vritti. It is a way that your purusha can get lost. But also, as it says in the 5th sutra, they're both hurtful and benign. So right perception here would be in the sense that it's really benign. It's harmless. It's like something you need to understand things. It's so having direct observation of particular studies and this and that you should do. Obviously, this is important. But then, what are you going to say, Lo?
No, just these 5 types of patterns. It seems like gives us some sort of a framework to understand how our mind functions.
Yeah.
It's giving you a kind of a bigger map how our mind usually works.
Yeah. Well, Patanjali is saying that this is kind of like the 5 sort of fundamentals of how the functioning of the mind, like as you said, works.
Yeah.
So everything we experience, and like even our thoughts and whatnot, it's all experienced through these 5. These 5. It's like a framework of the mind. So
yeah.
Remembering, being memory, deep sleep, and this and that. But deep sleep, a lot of people would think is unique, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So we'll start with. So we go to Sutra 7, which says right perception arises from direct observation, inference, or the words of others. And as we were talking about, right perception is, obviously, can be very positive. Having right perception is a pattern of the mind. It's a way that we do perceive reality, in a truer context than misperception.
Yeah, we're seeing things as they are.
As they are.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. And so here, the words of others, this is again alluding to the kind of the Vedic tradition of guru-disciple, the passing down of knowledge. Verbally. And so listening and then gaining right perception from teachers and so forth and so on. And so, there's a lot to talk about. There's actually not that much to talk about, I should say, with right perception, because it's pretty self-explanatory that it's a pattern that we have, but it's, like in some traditions, they will always say that, right seeing is very important and this and that, where Patanjali kind of says, well, it's still a pattern of consciousness. It is important, but from the state of pure awareness, right perception is still a pattern.
It's a movement of mind.
It's still a movement of mind, yeah.
Yeah, that's still, mind is in motion.
Yes.
That's what it is.
That's what it is. Though, and Patanjali does agree, obviously, and explains that it's beneficial for certain things, as obviously to gain the words of a teacher and so forth.
Beneficial, and also it's necessary.
Necessary, of course. And then the eighth one, we got the misperception as false knowledge, not based on what actually is. This is a big part of yoga philosophy, right? Misperception is a big part of Vedanta and Taoism and Buddhism as well, and Jainism is, and I mean, misperception in this day and age
is quite common. And
quite common,
maybe too much.
Too much, yeah. Just turn on YouTube and have a look at how much false knowledge and so forth and so on is online, not just on YouTube, but on many other platforms. And so that's how misperception is cultivated, through false knowledge, as it alludes to. So we're not seeing reality as it truly is. We're seeing it through the vrittis, through the jiva. And so you're seeing the world through rose-colored glasses.
Yeah, it just came to me, even the very fact that people misunderstand what real yoga is.
Yes.
That's
yes, exactly. 100%. Drop the mic, leave the building.
Yeah, it just came to me.
But that is right?
Yeah.
It's a misperception of what yoga actually is. And look, I know that the West has a tendency to shape things according to how they want, but that's not the way it actually is, and it's very frustrating for a lot of, especially Indians. And I find this also with Chinese Taoists, because a lot of people in the West want to change Taoism,
into interesting way.
To what appeals to them or what makes sense to them, instead of learning from the actual tradition. And again, this is misperception, right? Yoga is probably the biggest one in the world, because people think yoga is just about wearing tight pants and going and stretching and having cacao shakes all day. And then but it's not. It's a massive philosophy and a science of understanding the nature of consciousness itself. And so having seen the world according to the way you see it is one of the big problems that we encounter on the spiritual path.
Yeah. Something that we really need to be aware of, isn't it?
Of course, yeah.
Because, since we're talking about Eastern philosophy, in the West, because a lot of people don't grasp its very foundational knowledge of Eastern tradition, people tend to make it something very esoteric and something very mysterious, and that goes with a bit of a glamorous and that way, so that they make it something completely different, right? And the funny thing is that makes it sound something something cool, I don't know, and then that makes it more appealing to most people, and then it becomes, the knowledge gets warped in that way.
Well, Alan Watts said way back in the 60s that he was warning people about the over-sensationalization of Eastern philosophy. People had a tendency to over-sensationalize about the traditions, because they are mystical traditions, right? But then once you introduce the word mysticism to Westerners, then people have a very very unique way of understanding mysticism, where mysticism in the East is very grounded. You know what I mean? Obviously, there's a lot of fantastic stories too, with cities and this and that. But in general, it's very grounded, the mysticism. It's not some sort of, I guess, Christian perspective of what mysticism would be and this and that. And look, you can't blame a lot of Westerners for that. But again, it comes from just a misperception. And not many people being invested in actually studying the actual knowledge, right? Whereas what we're doing on my channel and what people like and why they come is because we want to explore the actual knowledge.
Yes.
And so it's interesting that we have misperception, and then that sort of leads into the next one, right? The conceptualization process. So conceptualization is based on linguistic knowledge, not contact with real things. So this kind of coincides with misperception, right? Because you are superimposing your version of reality onto a reality that's just innocent.
Yes.
That would be like me looking at you and just having 1,000 things without even knowing you too. A million things that I think that you are, because I have all these concepts in my brain.
Yes.
And I have this linguistic framework that I see reality through. And so, and Lao Tzu also is very quick to warn us about the linguistic patterning that we have within our mind as well, because though language is very important to especially understand philosophical concepts and frameworks, and to get, because we are human and we are intelligent, to get to a deeper understanding of reality, it can also be a hindrance in actually seeing reality as it truly is.
Yes.
People become too intellectual, right? People become too analytical, as a big problem in the West.
The problem with language is limited.
Yeah, it's limited. Yeah.
It cannot explain the things that's beyond the linguistic range of the language. Yeah, so that again, so the conceptualization happens from that limited language, so that can only create the limited knowledge.
Yes.
Right. That's the thing that a lot of people do. Like people like to philosophize things on like a meeting table, right? Let's say philosophizing about the yoga philosophy. Yeah. But, so okay, they create their own way of understanding, and they discuss certain topics and this and that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know the yoga philosophy entirely, unless you actually visit India and you experience that very culture of yoga philosophy, right? So that's why it says based on linguistic knowledge, not contact with the real thing.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
That's why the experiential knowledge is very, very important to make it as really for you.
Yeah.
To fully marinate into that knowledge, right?
Yeah.
That physically and mentally.
Well, we can have the label of a tree. Yeah. So if I say tree, everyone listening and watching knows what a tree is. But is it the actual tree? It's a label of what we see.
Yes.
But what we see is not actually a tree, but it's a label we've given to refer to something that we experience.
Yes.
We don't really know fundamentally sort of what that thing is, because to know what that is, you'd have to probably be a tree. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a troll already commenting, oh yeah, but you can study it and this and that, and yeah, of course, but like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the actual experiential knowledge of what it is to be a tree. So we have these labels that we use to build a conceptual framework of reality, because then we can communicate with each other and speak about it at a certain level. It doesn't mean it is exactly what we're saying, but this is why language is important and also a hindrance, because it's not exactly what it is, but we need the language to kind of converse, so we can kind of describe what we're experiencing or the reality.
Yes. Like, again, like with that tree, the word tree is something that human created as a word to call that as tree.
Yeah, of course.
And that is just functional, and it's just convenient for us to benefit our communication, right? But at the same time, it limits itself of what actual feeling of being a tree, for example.
Yeah.
Yes. So, again, this and the language thing, Alan Watts, I think, talked about the very similar thing as well, that how it limits our own experience through just labeling everything.
Yeah, it's true. They're just labels, and to a certain degree, they can be important, but they're not the actual experience of it, And so that conceptual framework is important, that we understand, in some sense. Okay, we have this conceptual framework. It can allow us to understand, for example, it can help us to understand yoga, right? We're speaking about yoga today. We're speaking about a lot of concepts and this and that. But the union of the yoga is not experienced, or the abidance of Purusha is something that is beyond the scope of a limited framework of concepts. It's something that transcends concepts, even though it's good that we can speak about it. It's handy because it gives us a kind of a roadmap. It's the old phrase, remember? The map is not the territory. And see, that's one of the key understandings in Eastern spirituality to always remember the map is not a territory. But the map is important.
Yes.
But you don't go on a trip and look at the map like, oh yeah, and you're experiencing reality through the map. It's just a way to get where you need to go.
Yes.
And that's what a conceptual framework does. The problem is we think that the conceptual framework is the reality, and then that's where we get lost and we become too intellectual, too analytical.
That's where all separation come from.
Exactly. And one of the Western habits and cognitive traits is categorization of objects, right? Categories and objects is a big part in cognitive science, the study of the Western mind. And so, but see, this is from the East, and also that was a problem there as well.
Yes.
So when you take this knowledge to the West, becomes even bigger problem, right? Like, so.
Yeah, so we become over analytic about things, and again, conceptualization has its place and its function, but we always have to go beyond that. I think to explore the real knowledge behind the word.
Exactly, but you don't want to make that also an intellectual game as well. And I find this with a lot of Westerners, like they might comment on a Taoist video of mine or something like, oh, to talk about the Tao is not to know the Tao. And it's like, oh, no. It's such a beginner comment, you know. So, and they're not understanding the importance of language, and they are discounting also that Lao Tzu did explain that, but also explained that language is a necessary evil. Hence, he wrote 81 small chapters. You know, it's not that he just walked away and said, you guys figure it out for yourself. That didn't happen, you know. And so we get to the 10th sutra. Deep sleep is a pattern grounded in the perception that nothing exists. So this is another interesting thing, and this is an interesting aspect of yoga philosophy that sometimes you don't find in other philosophies, but even the concept of deep sleep is a pattern of consciousness. Yes. It's still an experience. I mean, we could relate this somewhat to Vedanta and the 4 states of consciousness, where deep dreamless sleep is a state of consciousness, because it's still an experience, right? Deep sleep is still a pattern because you even when you're not dreaming, it's still a state of voidness. Yeah,
I guess there's still someone sleeping.
There's still someone sleeping. Yeah. It's still a pattern.
Yeah, it must be.
It's still happening in this reality as part of Prakriti. You know, you're not Purusha, right, in that state. And Patanjali not saying that you have to be, like he doesn't have any sort of philosophy of lucid dreaming or anything like that. It's just he's explaining that deep sleep is also a pattern
of consciousness
itself. It's also a vritti.
Yeah.
And even when we dream, right, that's still a sphere of Prakriti.
Yeah, that's when we do dream, that's something we can actually take it as a part of Prakriti, because that is still the object-subject kind of there's that sort of relationship there. So it's still a motion of mind, the movement of mind, the consciousness. Yeah.
And so in yoga philosophy, the key is to observe that as a pattern of consciousness, to try and get back to that kind of chitta vritti nirodha philosophy.
So even like we need to get to the stage where we could observe that what's happening in our deepest unconscious mind, right? Yeah.
Well, the thing is, deep sleep's still a movement of the mind.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's still a movement of the mind. Yes. And like I said, he's not saying that we can, you know, he's not speculating that we can sit in Purusha during a state of deep sleep. He doesn't have any sort of Vajrayana or Tibetan yoga perspective of lucid dreaming. He's just saying that we need to understand it as a pattern of consciousness. It's unfolding. It's Prakriti unfolding. But there should be no sort of, you know, attachment to that experience or so forth and so on. It's just a movement of the vrittis, essentially.
Yeah, because that's pretty interesting, because that, I think, again leads to the next verse. Verse 11, because that's tapping into something that's dormant in our memory.
Exactly.
Dormant in our subconscious mind or something like that.
Exactly. It does lead into the 11th. Remembering is the retention of experiences. And again, remembering here in Sanskrit, we're talking about smriti. So we're talking about remembering or recollectedness. And smriti is a very important Sanskrit word in all of the Indic traditions. And so the interesting thing here is, as you were alluding to with memory, we essentially have, positive and negative memories, right? Good or bad, if you will. And so, and we recollect these memories a lot of time. We speak about a lot of this on the podcast, right? So the process of Smriti is basically you register an experience, right? And then once you retain that, once you retain that memory, then we often repeat that process. That memory is constantly repeated in our mind. And you may have an experience, like a negative experience, right? Like something happened and you see this microphone and something happened around this microphone, obviously usually with other people. And then when you encounter this microphone again, even though the experience is different, you have a sensation of that experience. And that is the Smriti. That is we could say even the samskaras, the subconscious, subliminal mental imprints. The microphone didn't do anything to you, but it was present in the first negative experience. And you come back a year later and you see this microphone and a fear arises and you begin to suffer. You have a future suffering. And, I've heard a lot of teachers say that to suffer in the future is stupid, really, and nonsensical. Yes. But that's the nature of our mind, because we have this evolutionary negativity bias in our mind that it feels more comfortable to gravitate towards negativity than positivity.
Yes.
And so once we associate things that are negative, then we suffer and we struggle,
That sounds something like a magic, but that is really what's happening.
That's what's happening.
Like you are in a completely different time, the present moment, or like you said, years later, but you're in this kind of a similar situation or similar atmosphere that the same emotion arises.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and that's the pattern of experience. See, as Patanjali is saying, the retention of experiences. Yes. These are the patterns of experience that we experience. So, and that's why he's trying to get us to understand that memory itself is one pattern, a framework of how the mind operates. We obviously all know this because we do retain memories and we have samskaras and so forth and so on. So, and we have to observe that and try to, eliminate this kind of tendency to have future suffering based on past trauma, So, if we look at negative experiences, right, like Patanjali would say, negative experiences like traumas and this and that is because our pure awareness is still gravitating towards the vrittis, gravitating towards our past traumas because of memory. Memory is dragging past experiences back up because, like we said with the microphone, something terrible may have happened around this microphone, then you experience the microphone again in the future, and that terrible experience is revisited. It's not happening in the present. It doesn't happen.
It's something like when we get really sick from eating certain type of food, right? But then, like years later or later, you still can't eat the same food ever again because of the memory.
The memory,
right?
It's keeping you hostage.
Yes.
And all that probably was happening at that time is you might have had that food with a little bit of bad water or bacteria from somewhere. Doesn't mean at the present time it's going to be the same.
Yeah.
And it's just that it's that negativity bias and our mind gravitates and is intensified on past traumas. Like that, for example. That's not really a trauma, but it can be a trauma for someone who suffers from anxiety and stress and so forth and so on. And so, this is why essentially we like the news, right? Because we like to recollect negative experiences. Yeah. We like to we like to feed that negativity. Yeah,
keep feeding, with the same sort of energy that you keep feeding that negativity.
Yes.
And almost like you reaffirming that emotion or past memory was like kind of right or something like that.
Exactly.
That's just mind playing its own trick.
Dr. Jayadeva Yogendra, he said, I have the quote here, he said, if a dog bites a man, no one cares. But if a man bites a dog, then we want to remember it to tell others. This is how, and like he was explaining, this is kind of like our default mental state. Like it's kind of stupid when you think about it.
It is.
But like that's how we are. People watch the news a lot of the times because they can get something that they can go and speak at the water cooler the next day and gossip with their friends and this and that. And it's never about anything positive. We all know that. It's always about something negative or gossipy and this and that. And that's the unfortunate thing about the mind. It's kind of this default setting of negativity bias. So the idea of what Patanjali is saying is we can't stop memory, right? But we can create less memories by being in the present moment, by existing in the now, yoga, right? So once you are abiding as a Purusha more, what happens? You're not creating memories.
Yes.
So there'll be no memories that will play out in the future. They just won't happen. And so that's what he's saying, where because you can't stop memories themselves. They're just going to keep going. But once we continue the practice of being in the Purusha, then we can observe memories like the cloud we mentioned earlier. Memories will come and we look at it.
Yeah.
See that cloud? I've seen that cloud before many times, but the energy is not there. It's not intense anymore.
Right.
You don't follow the vrittis and you don't wander with it.
You remain as a pure awareness, and you don't give the energy out to the cloud, and cloud will just evaporate itself.
Exactly.
It'll just disappear.
Yeah. And so with that awareness training of abiding more as a Purusha, like you said, it won't be intense anymore. That you won't follow that memory. The old memories will resurface, but the energy is not there anymore.
And do you think when we keep practicing that way to stay at present moment and remain in Purusha state of mind, then that could become our default state of mind?
Of course. It's our actual state of mind. It's our real state of mind.
Yeah, that's a kind of nature of mind.
The nature of mind, yeah.
That emptiness and spontaneous.
The function of our mind, the default setting is negative.
Function of mind.
Yeah, these patterns are this negative, response we have to life itself, and a bad habit to remember everything and to recollect everything, both positive and negative. You know what I mean? And so Patanjali would say that, and this may seem extreme, not extreme, but this may seem odd for some people who have experienced really intense trauma in the past. But this would be his advice to dealing with trauma, would be the continual process of trying to abide as a Purusha. And for a few reasons, right? The past trauma that you experience, in some sense, because a lot of people have had intense past trauma, right? They may have been abused and this and that. And a lot of that, in some sense, can't be resolved because maybe the person was a really bad person and don't admit their mistakes and they took advantage of someone when maybe they were a young person, this and that. So Patanjali is saying, you can't really do much about that. That trauma had happened. It's happened. But you can change your response to the trauma because it's all in you. The trauma exists in you, the Purusha is in you, and this and that. So, and the joy and the bliss is within you as well. So would you rather be a blissful person or someone who is constantly suffering from past trauma? And so Patanjali's prescription would be, here is Purusha. I want you to abide as a Purusha as much as possible. And what will happen then is the intensity of that trauma will decrease. Not that it didn't happen or it doesn't exist. It means it won't hold you hostage anymore.
How we respond to that trauma is what's important.
You see it as a cloud like anything else. It's just another cloud. It's a bigger cloud, and more vivid. But your association to letting your pure awareness to drift with it is not there, And so that would be what Patanjali's prescription would be.
Yes.
So, and what he would say is that instead of like investing in those past traumas or investing in negative experiences we have had, we can create positive memories, or we can even, transform our conceptualization and framework through knowledge.
Yes.
Because we can't stop memories and this and that. Okay, so what should we do? Well, why don't we make the yoga tradition our operating system? Let's study this. Let's cultivate better memories, cultivate more knowledge, which then will help us deal with past traumas, negative experiences.
Yes, instead of feeding our mind with the same pattern of memories and movement of mind, we feed our mind with the right recipe,
the
which
right
is,
recipe,
for instance, yoga philosophy. Then it gives you big opportunity to transform your state of consciousness.
Yes, exactly. Well, on our podcast and on my channel, we're constantly studying Eastern spirituality. Make Eastern spirituality your black box, like in an airplane.
Yes.
My new black box is Eastern spirituality. It's not past memories, this and that. I'm making new memories with Eastern spirituality. I'm creating memories with knowledge, and this is going to help me evolve as an individual and, eventually, hopefully become enlightened.
Yes.
So that's what we ought to do, instead of like being so vexed by the negative things in our life and the traumas in our life. And I know, and we all understand, because the nature of evolutionary speaking was negativity bias. But once you continually observe that, Eastern spirituality is saying that you don't have to be a hostage to that negativity bias anymore. Thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, and that arise like clouds.
It comes and goes, and you just gotta let them come and go as well.
Exactly.
Not to stick to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we've talked about this on the podcast many times, memories that we experience in the present are not really happening, so don't let them conflict with the reality that you're experiencing in the present moment. And so the more you practice as abiding as the pure awareness, the more that you won't fall into that bad habit. You won't fall into the habit of, oh, there's that microphone again, I'm experiencing, a negative experience or what have you. Because you're more abiding in the present moment. So the less you're in the future or the past, the more you're in the now, the less memories can be created, and the less that other past memories can take over your life. So
again, the next verses that we will do next podcast would be more practical side of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
How to actually do that.
Yeah.
And Patanjali nodded out how to do it practically.
So the first 11 are basically the philosophy
Yes.
and the problems that we encounter from the vrittis.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, the next sutras going forward are the practical response and the spiritual practices that we need to apply to have Nirodha,
Yes.
to have the pure stillness of mind, tranquility, and to live from Purusha. So that's it for those 11 sutras. And like we said, Chip Hartrand's translation is a great translation. Another book I would highly recommend that you guys go out and read if you're serious about not just yoga tradition, but also all of the spiritual traditions in India and throughout Asia, actually, is the Yoga Tradition by Georg Feuchten. This is probably one of the best books I've ever read in my life. They call it the phone book of yoga for obvious reasons.
I think it's like encyclopedia in Hinduism,
Exactly.
not just yoga.
Yeah, it's not really
It talks about everything.
Yeah, it's not really just yoga.
Just yoga.
He talks about Taoism in here. He talks about Buddhism, Jainism. Everything's in it. And Georg Feuchten was one of the great scholars of the modern era. He's no longer with us, but this is, you have to clear out a few years to read this, but
For a very serious study.
It's serious study for those who are serious, and most of you are serious on my channel. So we hope you enjoyed today, and thank you for watching, and thank you to all of our Patreons out there, all of our subscribers. We love all of you, and we'll see you guys next time.